Okay, welcome to our video lesson on proving triangles, parts of triangles congruent. These are called CPCTC proofs, if you'll see that in your agenda. But basically, we're going to prove parts of triangles congruent after proving the triangles themselves congruent. And sometimes some of our proofs might have vocab words. Okay. So here's what we're doing. First, we have to prove triangles congruent, which means we're going to use one of our 5 shortcuts. And then second, we're going to show the parts are congruent, and we're using that this acronym CPCTC, which you guys know by now, stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so let's jump in. Here's our first proof. We are asked to show that these pieces are equal. We ultimately want to show that AB is congruent to CB. Well, I don't want to mark them congruent yet because I don't have it, but I want to show that AB and CB are equal. That's my job. Well, in order for me to do that, I can do that using congruent triangles, but I've got to figure out what reason here. So I've got my reasons listed across the top. I know it's not HL, because I don't have a right triangle. I'm going to go ahead and mark up that AD is congruent to CD. So AD is congruent to CD. So that gives me a side. And then I've got angles. I've got an angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. So I've got an angle. Well, I don't have 2 angles, so it's not angle, side. I don't have 3 sides, so it's not that. And I don't have another angle, so it has to be side, angle, side. And what would that side be? It would be side BD. He's congruent to himself. So if I can show these triangles are congruent through side, angle, side, it looks like I'm on my way. Okay, so let's start with our given. Let's start with AD is congruent. Oh, I want this to be in blue. Sorry. I want AD is congruent to CD, and my reason is given. That's one of my sides, so I've got that in my proof. And then the next thing I'm going to list is my angle that was in my given, and my angle is angle ADB, and that's congruent to angle CDB, and the reason for that, that's in my given. So I've got my side, I've got my angle, now I've got to put my other side in there. Why is BD congruent to itself? Do you remember that property? BD is congruent to BD. When I look in the mirror, I see my reflection. So this is the reflexive property of congruence. So now I have to say these 2 triangles are congruent. So I come in and I say triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. And the reason for that, we came through and said that was side, angle, side. Well, now that I have 2 triangles congruent, I can come through and say that their corresponding parts are congruent. Well, AB, as you can see, corresponds to CB. So my final statement is going to be AB, side AB, is congruent to side CB because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And that's it. We're done. That's your first CPCTC proof. Not too bad. That's only 5 statements. Okay, let's move on to one more. Okay, I'm going to highlight the pieces that I need to show. So I want to show that FG is congruent to CD. I cannot mark them congruent. I don't know that yet. What I can mark, though, is angle F is congruent to angle C. So I've got an angle. So that eliminates side, side, side. That eliminates HL. And then I've got E is the midpoint of GD. If E is the midpoint of GD, that means that GE and ED are congruent. If E is the midpoint of GD. So I've got some sides in here. So I've got an angle and a side. So this could be any of these three other choices. This is all I have. Or am I forgetting something? Let's go look at right here. What kind of angles are those? Those are vertical angles and they're congruent. So I've got two angles and a side. So it's not side angle side. I have to decide, is it angle angle side or side angle side? Well, you know what? The side is not the included side. So I have to use angle angle side to show that these triangles are congruent. All right, so let's start with the first angle, and that is angle F is congruent to angle C, and that reason is it was given. And then let's do my next angle. Angle, angle. We're going to say that angle FEG, angle FEG is congruent to angle CED. And my reason there, vertical angles are congruent. We've done that algebraic proof, so we can use that now. And now I have to write down my other given. So I need to say that E is the midpoint of GD. And that's a given. But what that gives me my side. That allows me to say that GE is congruent to DE. And what does that mean? A midpoint, or what's my reason? A midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. So now I can come through and I can show that I've got two congruent triangles. So I'm going to say that triangle FEG is congruent. FEG is congruent to CED. And the reason is we did the angle, angle, side postulate. And now let's look. Does FG, here's F and G. There's F and G. Does that correspond to C and D? It sure does. So I can say that FG is congruent to CD, and my reason is the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And I'm done. So those are what you hear people call CPCTC proofs.